December 19th, 1944. Somewhere east of St. Vith, a German tank commander believed he was outside the danger zone. His Panther was still more than 1,000 yards from the American line, maybe farther. The fog made distance feel longer than it was, but he knew the old calculation. American Shermans had 75mm guns, some had 76s. Their tank destroyers carried weapons he had already been briefed on. At this range, from the front, his armor should hold. Then the first hit arrived, not a mortar, not artillery walking in from above. A flat, violent strike straight through the fog. The Panther lurched sideways. Sparks blew out from the turret ring. A crewman inside screamed once, and then the commander heard the sound he had learned to fear more than impact: fire. The strange part was not that an American gun had hit him. The strange part was where it had hit him from. There was no Sherman in sight, no big anti-tank gun on the road, no obvious muzzle flash. Just a frozen ridgeline, a stone wall, and somewhere behind it, an American vehicle with an open turret and a barrel the German intelligence files had not properly accounted for. A gun built to shoot airplanes out of the sky had been lowered toward the ground, and the men driving Germany's last armored offensive were about to learn that their maps were wrong. Their briefings were late, and their safest distance was no longer safe. This is the story of the M36 tank destroyer, not a miracle weapon. Not a machine that won the war by itself. Something more uncomfortable than that. It was a correction that arrived after too many men had already burned, and when it finally reached the front, the German army did not understand what it was looking at until its last great attack in the West was already breaking apart in the snow. To understand why that mattered, you have to start months earlier, in Normandy, when American tank crews were learning a brutal fact the hard way. Their guns were not enough. In the summer of 1944, the bocage turned every road into a trap. The fields in Normandy were small, boxed in by thick hedgerows that stood like walls. A tank could be 20 yards from another tank and not know it until the first shot came through the leaves. American crews entered those lanes inside Shermans they trusted because they had to. The Sherman was reliable, it could move, it could be repaired. It was available in numbers the Germans could not match. But reliability did not stop a Panther's shell. A Sherman gunner could do everything right. He could spot the German tank first. He could bring the gun onto the target. He could fire at a range any training film would have called reasonable. And sometimes the shell simply broke against the Panther's front plate. A flash, a scar, then nothing. The German tank kept coming. That was the arithmetic of the fighting after D-Day. The Panther's sloped frontal armor could defeat the standard American 75mm gun at ranges where American crews were forced to fight. The newer 76mm gun improved the odds, but it did not erase the problem. Against the heaviest German armor, especially from the front, American crews still needed position, timing, or luck. And luck was not a doctrine. The officers reading casualty reports in rear headquarters saw the same phrases again and again. Round failed to penetrate. Enemy tank destroyed friendly vehicle with one shot. Crew losses severe. Morale affected. But the worst phrase was the one no official report wanted to say plainly. The men were doing their jobs, and the equipment was asking them to do the impossible. Inside the American Army, that truth collided with an idea that had been protected for years. Lieutenant General Leslie McNair, commander of Army Ground Forces, had believed that tanks should not primarily fight other tanks. Tanks, in the doctrine he helped shape, were for breakthrough and exploitation. Enemy armor was supposed to be handled by separate tank destroyer units. Fast vehicles, lightly protected, armed to ambush and relocate. On paper the system was clean. In Normandy the paper got wet, burned, and disappeared under the tracks. The Germans did not always attack the way the manuals predicted. They did not simply roll forward in massed formations waiting to be ambushed. They defended from hull-down positions. They used villages, ridges, and tree lines. They made the Americans expose themselves, and when Panthers or Tigers appeared at the wrong angle, American tank destroyer crews often had the same problem as the Shermans. They could see the enemy, they could hit the enemy, they could not always kill the enemy. The answer already existed in pieces. It had not been born as a tank gun. In the late 1930s, the United States Army wanted a better anti-aircraft weapon. Aircraft were flying higher, faster, and farther. The old guns were not enough. The Army needed a barrel that could throw a heavy shell with enough speed to reach bombers high above ports, depots, and cities. That weapon became the 90mm anti-aircraft gun. Its purpose was vertical. Its barrel pointed at the sky. Its crews trained to track aircraft. Its shell was meant to climb into thin air and explode where a bomber formation used to be. But velocity is not loyal to one direction. If a shell can climb toward an aircraft at high speed, it can also travel flat toward armor at high speed. Somewhere in the chain of engineers, ordnance officers, and test men, the obvious became unavoidable. The 90mm gun was not just an anti-aircraft weapon. It was the most powerful anti-tank gun the Americans could put on a mobile chassis. The problem was getting the Army to act like that mattered. The solution took shape around an existing vehicle, the M10 tank destroyer chassis. It used a Sherman-based hull, but with a different turret and a 3-inch gun. Engineers designed a new turret large enough to handle the 90mm gun. The result was not elegant in the way parade vehicles are elegant. The turret was open at the top. The armor was thin compared with a tank. The crew could be killed by shell fragments, air bursts, mortars, and infantry close enough to throw explosives down into the fighting compartment. But the gun had reach, the gun had authority, and in armored combat, authority meant one thing. If you hit first from far enough away, the other crew might never get to answer. The vehicle became the M36. Some men called it the Jackson. Many crews simply called it the 90. And for several crucial months, the 90 existed in a kind of institutional shadow. It was being built, it was being tested, it was being shipped, but it was not yet where the dying was happening. That is the part of the story that hurts. The M36 was not a secret because genius had hidden it in a cave. It was secret because armies are slow, doctrines have gravity, and a weapon does not become useful until the right ammunition, crews, mechanics, spare parts, transport schedules, and commanders all meet in the same place. By July 1944, American crews in France needed the gun. By July 1944, more than enough men understood why, but the Army still had to unwind its own confidence. Then, on July 25th, during Operation Cobra, the great American breakout from Normandy, McNair was killed by bombs dropped short by American aircraft. He became the highest-ranking American officer killed in combat in Europe. His death did not instantly fix the problem. No institution changes direction like a tank spinning on pavement. The beliefs remained. The paperwork remained. The training assumptions remained. The nervousness around new equipment remained. But the wall had cracked, and through that crack, the M36 started moving toward Europe. When the first M36s arrived on the continent in the autumn of 1944, the men receiving them did not see a revolution at first. They saw another tank destroyer. Same general shape, same kind of weather-stained hull, same open turret that let the rain in and offered no comfort to anyone who had ever heard German artillery tree burst above a forest road. Then they saw the barrel. Longer, heavier, different. The instructors explained the ammunition. The crews fired a few rounds into wrecked German hulks or test plates. They learned the recoil. They learned the loader's rhythm. They learned that the spent casing came back hot and hard and loud. For men who had spent months watching shells bounce, the first proper firing of the 90 did something no lecture could do. It changed their posture. It did not make them fearless. Nothing did that. But it gave them back a piece of the battlefield they had lost. Distance. Before the M36, range often belonged to the Germans. A Panther at long range could feel like a locked door. The American crew might need to close in, maneuver, flank, or wait for artillery and air support. With the M36, the door did not always stay locked. The new gun could hurt heavy German armor at ranges that forced German crews to revise what they thought they knew. And that revision was exactly what did not happen fast enough. Because German intelligence had a picture of American armor in the West. And like many intelligence pictures, it was useful until reality changed. The Germans knew the Sherman. They knew the M10. They knew the American 75 and 76. They knew British 17-pounder guns and the danger of tungsten core ammunition. So when German tank crews began reporting unusual long-range hits in October and November, analysts had a ready explanation. Maybe the Americans had better ammunition. Maybe British ammunition was being supplied to American units. Maybe the same 76mm guns were suddenly becoming more dangerous because the shell had changed. That explanation was comfortable. It required no new vehicle, no new gun, no new threat diagram, no urgent correction to every armored commander preparing for a winter offensive. It was also wrong. The variable was not only the shell, it was the gun, and the gun was already in the field. American commanders learned this in a way that was more direct than any memo. Crews started coming back with reports that sounded impossible under the old rules. Panther hit at a range where the 76 would have been doubtful. Tiger damaged from the front. German armor stopped before it could reach its own killing range. A vehicle that still looked at a distance, like something the enemy already understood, was writing new math on the battlefield. But the M36 did not erase every problem. Its open turret remained a cruel compromise. In forest fighting, artillery bursts could be more frightening than tanks. In towns, infantry could be deadly from windows and upper floors. In mud, snow, and darkness, no gun solved navigation, fuel fatigue, or fear. The 90 gave American crews reach. It did not give them immortality. That distinction matters, because the M36's real impact was not that it became invincible. Its real impact was that the Germans had planned their last offensive around assumptions that were no longer true. By December 1944, Adolf Hitler's plan for the Ardennes was built on speed. The German army would punch through a thin American sector, seize roads and bridges, drive toward Antwerp, split the Allied armies, and force a political crisis in the West. The plan was desperate. It depended on surprise, bad weather, fast movement, captured fuel, and traffic discipline across roads that could barely hold the weight of what was coming. It also depended on the belief that German heavy armor could force its way through American positions before the Allies recovered. The briefings given to German armored crews were not fantasy. They were based on what the intelligence system thought it knew. American mobile anti-tank fire was dangerous but manageable. Maintain distance, use frontal armor, keep moving, do not let the Americans flank you. Those rules had made sense earlier, they were now late. And in war, a late truth can be more dangerous than a lie because it still feels responsible. December 16th arrived in darkness and fog. German guns opened across the Ardennes. American units holding quiet sectors woke to a war that had suddenly grown teeth. Phone lines broke, roads jammed, command posts lost contact, entire regiments were cut off. Green units and exhausted units alike were thrown into a battle no one at the front had expected at that scale. The first German gains were real, the shock was real, the danger was real. But the offensive immediately began to meet the thing every armored attack fears more than enemy courage. Delay. A road blocked for 1 hour becomes a road blocked for 6. A bridge not taken in the morning becomes a division stuck by evening. A tank column that has to stop becomes a target, then a traffic jam, then a fuel problem, then a graveyard. St. Vith became one of those places where time itself turned against the German plan. The town mattered because roads mattered. In the Ardennes, roads were not background, they were the battle. Heavy tanks could not simply drift through forests like smoke. They needed routes, junctions, bridges, surfaces that would hold their weight, and fuel trucks close enough to keep them alive. American defenders around St. Vith did not have to annihilate every German formation. They had to hold long enough to break the schedule. That is where the M36 became more than a better gun. It became a clock breaker. Picture the position: a frozen ridgeline, a narrow road below, farm buildings with shattered roofs, snow caught in the branches, men so cold their hands felt borrowed from somebody else. Behind a bank of earth and stone, an M36 crew waits with the turret open to the weather. The commander stands high enough to see, low enough to hope he is not seen. The gunner has one eye pressed to the sight. The loader has a 90mm round in his arms, heavy enough that every movement is work. The driver keeps one hand ready because firing is only half the tactic. The other half is leaving. Down on the road, German armor appears in the fog. A heavy tank at the front, Panthers behind it. Infantry riding or walking close enough to protect the column if it can keep moving. The American commander does not fire immediately. That takes discipline. Too early and the angle is bad. Too late, and the German guns may find him first. So he waits. The range closes. The road narrows. The leading tank reaches the place the American crew has already measured in their heads. Then the 90 fires. The whole vehicle shoves backward against its suspension. The shell crosses the frozen air in seconds. It hits the lead tank low, where armor geometry becomes more complicated and certainty becomes thinner. Maybe it penetrates cleanly, maybe it does not, but it does enough. A cracked seam, a jammed turret, a wounded transmission, a driver stunned or dead, a tank that stops where it must not stop. In open country, one stop tank is damage. On an Ardennes road, one stop tank can become a wall. The Panthers behind it hesitate. A second M36 fires from a different angle. Another impact. Another vehicle halted or burning. German infantry spill off the road. American artillery begins to fall where the column has bunched. The M36s reverse out of position before the Germans can bracket them. They do not stay to admire the shot. Survival belongs to the crew that remembers the enemy also has guns. 4 minutes later, those same American vehicles are somewhere else on the slope. Barrels turn toward the next opening in the fog. That was the M36 at its best. Not a duelist standing in the road, a hidden knife with an engine. A gun that appeared, struck, vanished, and left the enemy trying to explain why the old range tables had failed. The Germans did explain it. They just explained it too late. Reports moved backward from crews to battalions to staff officers to analysts to bulletins. But the German communication system in late 1944 was no longer the clean machine of earlier campaigns. Rail lines were bombed. Fuel was scarce. Headquarters moved under pressure. Paper piled up in the wrong places. Technical details traveled slower than panic. By the time the truth became official enough to matter, many German crews had already learned it personally. American M36 tank destroyers carried a 90mm gun. Not the weapon the files had assumed. Not merely improved ammunition. A different class of threat. The cost of that error landed exactly where Germany could least afford it. In crews and heavy armor. The Tiger II, often called the King Tiger, was terrifying on paper and dangerous in the field. It had thick armor, a powerful gun, and an aura that traveled ahead of it. But it was also heavy, mechanically demanding, fuel-hungry, and produced in numbers Germany could not replace quickly. An American vehicle lost in 1944 was a tragedy for its crew. A German heavy tank lost in 1944 was a subtraction from a shrinking future. That was the industrial asymmetry beneath the whole story. Both armies made mistakes. Both armies trusted old ideas too long. Both armies had systems that processed inconvenient data slowly. But the United States could be wrong, absorb the cost, correct course, and build more. Germany could not. This is why the M36 matters. Not because it was perfect. It was not. Many tank destroyer veterans loved speed as much as firepower. Some preferred lighter vehicles that could move faster and hide better. The M18 Hellcat, with its 76mm gun, had a speed and agility the M36 did not. In some situations, that mattered more than caliber. A bigger gun did not automatically make a better day. The M36's open turret could be a death sentence under artillery. Its armor could not invite a fair fight. Its crews still needed cover, discipline, maps, maintenance, ammunition, and luck. But in the specific winter, when Germany gambled everything on a fast armored breakthrough through the Ardennes, the M36 gave American defenders something decisive. It gave them a way to punish German armor before German armor expected punishment. It gave roadblocks more reach. It gave tired battalions a weapon that could make a heavy tank commander hesitate. And hesitation was poison to the German plan. By December 23rd, the weather began to clear. Allied aircraft returned over the battlefield. German columns that had been delayed by roadblocks, blown bridges, stubborn infantry, artillery, fuel shortages, and tank destroyer fire were now exposed from above. The offensive did not fail because of one gun. No honest history should say that. It failed because the plan demanded too much from a Germany that had too little left. It failed because American units held crossroads longer than expected. It failed because fuel did not arrive where it had to. It failed because weather changed. It failed because command confusion, traffic, resistance, terrain, and Allied air power all closed in. But the M36 belonged inside that failure. It was one of the reasons German armor discovered that the American line was not the same line it had studied. It was one of the reasons the timetable bled out. It was one of the reasons a tank commander who believed he was safe at distance suddenly found himself looking through smoke, trying to understand what had hit him. And then the war moved on. That is another hard truth about weapons. The men who need them most rarely get to stand beside them in a museum. They get mud, smoke, frozen hands, a hot shell casing bouncing behind the breech, a commander yelling to reverse before artillery finds them. Then, if they are lucky, they get silence. After the war, the separate American tank destroyer doctrine faded. The Army absorbed the lessons into a different future. Main battle tanks would carry heavy guns, better armor, and the roles that had once been separated by theory. The M36 continued in foreign service for years, passed to allies, rebuilt, reworked, and used in wars its original designers had not imagined. A gun created to kill aircraft, then repurposed to kill German armor, kept serving long after the King Tiger had become a relic. But the human story is quieter. Most M36 crewmen did not become famous. They did not return home and explain penetration tables over dinner. They did not spend the rest of their lives telling strangers that they had changed the battle. Many said almost nothing. They had watched friends die before the 90 arrived. They had watched enemies die after it did. They knew the difference between a weapon that works and a weapon that arrives in time. Those are not the same thing. The M36 was the weapon that arrived late enough to indict the system that delayed it. and early enough to matter when Germany made its last armored gamble in the West. That is the uncomfortable shape of the story. On the American side, the old doctrine cost men months they did not have. On the German side, the old intelligence picture cost crews a truth they needed before crossing the line of departure. Both sides paid for believing the file longer than the field. Only one side could afford the bill. The gun itself had no opinion about any of this. It had begun life pointed upward, waiting for aircraft at altitude. Then engineers lowered it, crews loaded it, mechanics kept it running, and young men in open turrets fired it through fog at targets they had once been told were almost beyond reach. The official language would later call it improved anti-armor capability. The men at the front had simpler language. The shell went through. The tanks stopped. We moved before they hit us back, that was enough. And somewhere in the Ardennes snow, the German file still said the American gun was smaller than it was. The file was neat. The battlefield was not. The gun that had been built to look at the sky was already waiting behind a wall, aimed at the road.